For more on this story, our guest is Quentin Peel, research fellow at the Chatham House over in the UK. Thank you so much for joining us on France 24. Do you believe that this deal goes far enough? Is this a good deal, in your opinion?
Well, I think the good news is that it's a deal, and it's a European deal. That was very important both to Angela Merkel, who's got trouble back home in Germany, and to Emmanuel Macron, who is very keen to see that Europe can produce solutions. The bad news, I fear, is it's going to be expensive. It's going to take quite a long time to put into effect, and I fear it's going to make life more difficult for genuine refugees who are fleeing from conflict and other crises in the world. It's not going to make life any easier for them.
Do you think that this deal is enough to counter the rise of far-right political parties, to allay the fears of European voters? A lot of people saying that the reason that we're seeing politicians like Viktor Orban in Hungary or this new government in Italy is partly a response, this backlash to the arrival of migrants over the last few years.
Well, it depends hugely on how well this works. The first thing we've got to see is what are these so-called controlled centres going to be? Where are they going to be to process refugees and other migrants? The chances are, I think we've heard, they're likely to be still in the countries which are the reception areas for the refugees, i.e. Italy, Greece, Spain, and so on. So it's going to be voluntary where they are. Now, that word voluntary is to buy off the Hungarians, for example, who were adamant that they cannot be compelled to take any refugees. On the other hand, it does help the Italians because I think the European Union is going to spend more money, and it's also offering to spend a lot more money in Africa, maybe in North Africa, trying to set up reception centres there. I think what worries me is what these centres are going to look like. They have nice names, but are they going to be sort of prison camps, or are they going to be genuinely well looked after, well-run operations that process people speedily? All of that is in the air.
We could maybe draw a parallel with what's going on in the United States. We have there the U.S. immigration authorities. Of course, in Europe, we are not separating children from their parents, but there is this idea of camps, as you were saying, of detention centers, basically, for these migrants. Is that something that you fear happening here in Europe?
Well, I think that is a worry. There was a comment that I saw this morning from the International Organization for Migration saying what we must avoid is having an Australia-like situation, because in Australia, they've got this sort of detention centres on Nauru or islands away from Australia where the conditions are miserable. But the Europeans have said, look, we're only going to set up these so-called disembarkation centres with the assistance of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees and the IOM. So really, we're going to do it properly.
Quentin Peel, the idea of having centers in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, in North Africa, and at the shores of Europe, at the end of the day, this is trying to keep migrants from coming to Europe and from being able to stay. Is it realistic, though, to tell people to stop coming to Europe?
I fear it isn't. I think we know what the demographics are like. There is a very much a growing population in Africa in particular, where people are very poor, and as they get slightly better off and slightly better educated, the first thought is, well, why don't we look for a better life in Europe? So I think that the problem is very much it remains, and it can't be solved just by throwing money at it. It's a very difficult problem, and I think one has to have some sympathy for those who are trying to find a solution. Having said that, I'm not sure we're there yet. I think that the crisis, we could easily see another crisis if there's a big conflict, say, in a North African country. And the other thing is, there is no agreement at this moment from the North Africans to have these centres in their countries. Libya is probably the most challenging, and the country, as we know, is in chaos.
Would it have been more sensible to invite these other countries that are directly involved in these North African countries, African countries? Should they also not be part of this discussion?
Well, the truth is, the very first thing that Angela Merkel said when she emerged from this discussion this morning was, we've got to do this in partnership with the African countries. So in a way, that's precisely the message she's giving out. Now, I think there's a lot of talking still to be done, and there's going to have to be a lot of money spent. One of the key decisions they made was another 3 billion euros for Turkey, because they've been helping hold back the refugees in Turkey. It's not a very nice solution at the end of the day. It sounds rather like what Theresa May introduced in Britain for immigrants, which is what she called a hostile environment. It's not going to make Europe a comfortable place to come to.
Well, we hope that for those of us in Europe, it remains a place to live as well. Thank you so much for joining us on France 24. Quentin Peel, Research Fellow at Chatham House in London. Thanks again for joining us.